Good morning. How are we this morning? I got more than just, that was good. You guys just outranked middle school boys in your ability to respond. Anybody with a middle school boy, do you know what I'm talking about? You guys sound great. You look great. Super excited to be here with you guys. We've been talking the last few weeks, as Stephen said, about generations and how we get to have an impact right here and right now, but we also get to leave something for the generations behind us. And that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I love seeing, is that we get to pass the keys to the kingdom to a generation that's following behind us. But it doesn't mean that we just get a pass as we age. It means we continue to live this out, and that's what we're going to take a look at together today. Before we jump too far in, I just want to take a moment and pause and pray and center our hearts and make sure that this is from Him. Will you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you for being a God who has seen every generation, a God who has loved every generation, a God who has moved and created and built and designed and done marvelous things from generation to generation. God, from the very first page of the Bible to the last page to what we live out now, God, we know you are there. So right now, God, will you help us sit in your presence and listen to what it is that you have for us. God, may your words speak. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I've been doing a little bit of research about a generation called Gen Z. So I just want to take a little poll. Gen Z are 10, 11 to 25, 26, depending on the study. I don't know how that works, but that's what the research has told me. Does anybody know a Gen Z? Just know one. You don't even have to talk to them. You know of one. You've ever seen them before, okay? Excellent. We're all on equal playing field. Anybody have a Gen Z in their home? We're praying, okay? Gen Z is this unique generation. There are middle school and high school students, and so they're the ones I hang out with. Here's the kicker. They're also our adults now, right? They're in the workforce. We have some on staff here at Madison Park. We're seeing amazing things come from this generation, but this generation has a few things that drive me nuts. And I know some of you who are older than me said the same thing about millennials for a season. Is that correct? Don't tell me. I already know, okay? We can't buy houses because we had avocado toast. I know what our faults are, okay? But for a Gen Z, I have one that resides in my household, and she's amazing and she's hilarious. And the other day I decided that I was going to show her a song that I learned when I was in college that changed my life. A worship song that really brought to life this picture of love. It's a song by Jesus Culture. It's amazing. And I wanted to show her this song that meant so much to me. I thought, if I can show her this song, it will change her life. All of a sudden, all the world will be healed and whole. This one song will stir the spirit in entire communities. This one moment where I show her this song that carried me through a season will bring her incredible joy and change the face of the world, okay? I had high hopes for this moment. So I get out my phone and I push play, and I'm caught up in it. The Spirit is moving. I'm remembering all those moments that I've listened to the song. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? That intro that just brings you right back. And I'm about 20 seconds in, and I can feel that, yes, amen's coming from me, right? And I open my eyes. She's glazed over. She's on her phone, scrolling through TikTok. She's watched 4 TikToks by the time we've gotten to the 20-second mark, and I'm like, okay, fine, she'll catch it. So I close my eyes again, and the first word is spoken at second 44 of this song. And I open my eyes, and I'm like, isn't it good? And she's not even there. She's not paying attention at all. Anybody have this experience with a Gen Z before? Okay, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's you hand them your phone and you're like, pick some songs for our road trip. And they go, click. Oh, that's a good one. Click. That's a good one. Click. I don't even know what song was just playing. If you watch them scroll through TikTok, they do the same thing. I'm on the TikTok over here. I didn't even get 3 words in, and they're over here on TikTok 17. This generation's attention span is tragic. But it's not just my personal experience or your personal experience. They actually have done studies to prove that this generation, more than any generation before, has a hard time focusing. About 10 years ago, a little bit more, they did a study with 4-year-olds where they had 4-year-olds watching a fast-paced, well-known television show called SpongeBob. Are we familiar with SpongeBob? Yes, it was not my era. I was a little bit too old. I was in like high school by the time it was coming out, so it was just a lot of noise and chaos. I didn't understand it. So they had 4-year-olds watch SpongeBob, and then they had 4-year-olds watch a slower-paced television show, and then had them do tactile tasks. And what they found was actually quite alarming. I'm going to read the quote to you. It says this: just 9 minutes of viewing a fast-paced television cartoon had immediate negative effects on 4-year-olds' executive function. 9 minutes into this episode. Part of that is because every 11 seconds, the scene of SpongeBob changes. After just 9 minutes, that's not even like a full episode of TV. They already are impaired in their ability to function. Now, this was when they were 4. Now these kids are 16. Imagine where they are now. This is scary, right? The problem is, I think sometimes we like to just blame media and culture and social media when in all actuality, we need to ask the question, what's actually going on? I had an intern, and we were talking about this a while ago, and she's part of Gen Z, and she was trying to share a little bit, and she said these words to me that I can't shake. She said, "Our earbuds are always on, and we are endlessly scrolling because we don't know or like what's in the silence." Think about your Gen Zs. We don't know or like what's in the silence. They have been taught silence means something bad could happen. They've become anxious and afraid and overwhelmed by the unknown because if it's quiet, what if bad things happen? Here's the kicker. We may see it tangibly in them, but they learned it from us. Ours may not be SpongeBob or TikTok, but they learned it from us. This constant need to run from something that could be unknown or scary, this constant need to flee from the uncertainty of life, right? What do? We just pour ourselves into our work. We pour ourselves into politics. We pour ourselves into our cell phones. We pour ourselves into some activity that's going to get us accolades. We're going to pour ourselves into making money. We're just going to pour ourselves into something because if we stop for a moment, we actually recognize that there is fear of the silence and the stillness. So we've become a distracted people, all of us. It just looks a little different. Think about the last time you just put your phone down and walked away from it for a couple hours. Some of you went, nope, that's got to be with me. We keep it in our pockets, in our hands, because what if we miss something? What if something happens in the world? What if something falls apart and I wasn't there to pay attention to it? There's fear. I even believe that the enemy who is out to destroy us uses distraction as a way to keep us from focusing on what God is doing all around us. So we're distracted. Our attention is limited, and we can see it in Gen Z, but it's true from generation to generation, and it's time to change it. In fact, I believe that the antidote to distraction is obedient risk. The antidote to distraction is obedient risk. And what I mean by that, this phrase obedient risk, if you've been around, you've heard it a couple times. It's one of our values. We believe that a faith that is rooted in the Holy Spirit, in God, and what He's doing around us means we're going to say yes when He says to do something, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. So if distraction is rooted in fear, if distraction is keeping us from the unknown, then the way to counter that is obedient risk that says, I see the danger and I'm going to step into it anyway. I see the unknown and I'm going to go there because that's where Jesus is calling me to take my next step. So the antidote to this distracted life that all of us are living is actually obedient risk. And we see it consistently all over the place in the Bible. We're going to read one story in particular about the disciples who have lived out this faith in Jesus and have watched miracle after miracle after miracle. And yet somehow between miracles, we find that they are often distracted in the ordinary. It's the ordinary moments that they find themselves unable to focus, right? How many of us would say that we're not distracted by giant things, but it's just the walk from here to the car or the drive from home to here? We're distracted by something that is so ordinary. So that's where we start. You see, the disciples in this story have just witnessed a miracle. 5,000 men plus women and children, so probably upwards of 20,000 people, have just been fed by a basket full of food. You can't deny the miracle that this is, right? You can't deny it. The disciples have witnessed it. They were a part of it. They got to be with Jesus as he's helping make this miracle happen. They witnessed this aha moment, and then they have to get onto a boat. But I wonder how many of us think, if I was like the disciples and I saw this extraordinary, miraculous moment, and then I went about my normal day, life would just be fantastic, and I'd never doubt again. I'd never have fear again, right? Any of us ever think the disciples are just ludicrous? No, you guys are wise, okay? I think about it in my own life. I remember I took a group of students to camp in Arizona, and we were doing this one day where we were off-site, and there was this rock wall, 70 feet up, and the students got to rappel down it, which was awesome. The girls cried. It was amazing, right? Complete fear. Talk about obedient risk. But we're down in this basin. The boys are out at the field because they can't fit us all in there. So the girls, we're there, and we're tucked in, and we're watching as the girls are rappelling down. But then this leader, one of the camp counselors, his name's Duncan. He's a professional rock climber, apparently was on YouTube. At the time, I had no idea what that meant, okay? I understand now YouTube's kind of a big deal. So he's a famous, or at least a professional rock climber, and he gets up there and he wants to show the girls how not scary it is. And so he starts coming down, but the guy that's belaying him underneath accidentally clicks out the rope. And so what was supposed to be 70 feet of easy goings became 65 feet of free fall. And I remember because I was sitting on a rock right here, and he was supposed to land right in front of me, and there was this jagged rock that he was supposed to land on, and somehow he managed to land next to the rock, the only straight land anywhere from this angle, and he lands right there, and all of us girls can tell you to this day what it sounded like, what it looked like. All the air left his lungs. He turned purple. He couldn't get any oxygen in. And in this moment, I'm torn between, can I help him? And I'm very aware that this is not a moment I can help, but I can get these girls out. And so adrenaline kicks in. We get the girls up and out. And then we get to the field, and we begin to do some praying and crying and praying. In the meantime, emergency crews have put him on a backboard. Then they put him in a boat because they couldn't get him up out of the basin, in a boat over to the boat ramp. And then from the boat ramp on an ambulance to the helicopter pad that was on the grass. And he gets flown to Phoenix, just a couple hours away, for medical care. In this moment, I stopped and I went, I'm about to do some trauma counseling with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade girls. To say that my fear was high would be an understatement. And we didn't hear anything, didn't know what happened to him. All week long, the girls are asking questions, and I don't have answers. They're not sharing any information. We just kind of assumed the worst. And on the last day, they do this thing where they auction off the leaders to raise money to build a well in Haiti. And so they told my group, wait till the end. And that last moment, the doors open, and Duncan walks in with a cane and a bruised tailbone. You can tell me that I just made up how intense this moment was. You can tell me that this wasn't a miracle, but I know those girls know and those leaders know this was a miracle. He should not be alive, let alone walking. And I watch this miracle, and he comes in, and the girls get to celebrate. And you would think, just like the disciples feeding 20,000, you'd go into your ordinary life, and you would be changed forever. And it has changed me. I'm a different person because of that miracle. But the reality is I got into normal rhythms, and I got distracted by family, and I got distracted by friends. I got distracted by my job and my responsibilities and paying rent. I got distracted, and it became a moment on a radar instead of a life that I carried forever. We get distracted by the ordinary. And so we see this moment with these disciples. It says, Matthew 14, verse 22, immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. While he dismissed the crowd, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Then the disciples saw him walking on the lake. They were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. You see, they're all in this boat because Jesus sends them away, right? He's like, "Go ahead of me," which I've always wondered, like, did they have a plan? Is Jesus going to like run around the other side of the lake? Is he going to commandeer another boat and come up behind them? Like, what was the goal? I'm guessing none of them thought, oh, Jesus is going to come out walking on water. And so they get in this boat, and it's beginning to get a little rocky. And these lakes and bodies of water were pretty choppy. This is normal for this region, and they're getting hit on all sides. The chaos is happening. They know where their target is. They're knowing they're supposed to go this way, but they can't focus on where they're going because of what's happening right in front of them. And they can feel the pressure on all sides. They understand, and the ordinary takes over. They just witnessed the extraordinary, but now the ordinary takes over, and they're distracted. Their heads are down, and they're just going, okay, we just need to get to the other side. We just need to get to the other side. And then all of a sudden, a figure comes walking towards them. Can't possibly be Jesus because that would be extraordinary, right? So it has to be a ghost. Because their heads are down, because they're so focused on the ordinary, they can't recognize the extraordinary. Even though they've watched it over and over and over again, in this moment, they're so distracted by the ordinary that they have to take the miraculous and turn it into something basic. And so they see him and they become afraid, because when we are uncertain, when things are uncertain in our world, when chaos is hitting on all sides, we go back to just trying to make excuses and rationales, and we get distracted, which is a response in fear. So they just buckle down and they hope. There's a ghost, the waves are crashing, just focus. They get distracted by the ordinary, and they miss the extraordinary. I wonder how many of us are distracted by the ordinary. Maybe we've seen some really cool things. Maybe we've watched God move in our families, in our homes, in our neighborhoods. But now we're so focused, I just need to get through. Things are a little bit rocky. There's something going on, but I can't pay attention to what God's doing because I just am distracted by the ordinary. The cool thing is, the antidote to distraction is obedient risk, which means there's something we can do in response to our own fear, and it's to take some obedient risk, which brings us to one of the guys that's in this boat. His name's Peter. And Peter is kind of known as that guy who puts his foot in his mouth all the time, right? He's that guy who does all the ridiculous things, right? I imagine if he was in youth group, he's the one jumping off the roof. Okay, why? Because we told him not to, right? This is that guy. Peter is zealous. But part of that is he also lives out obedient risk. And so we pick up the story introduced to this guy named Peter in this moment as he steps out in courage. You see what it says is it says, "But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I, Lord.' 'If it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come to you on the water.' 'Come,' he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. There's a lot that's happening. First, Jesus recognizes fear. I want you to know that Jesus understands that you are afraid, that we have some things in us that go, I'm not so sure about that, Jesus, that's pretty big. He recognizes it. He's not afraid to step into that space and go, don't worry, I got you. Okay, you can talk to him about it. And so he comes to them and he's like, don't worry. And Peter does this crazy thing. Okay, if I'm one of the ones in the boat, I'm just putting my head down and I'm praying that nothing happens, that we make it, that if it's a ghost, it's a nice ghost like Casper. Like I'm hoping for the best. But here comes Peter to the edge of the boat and he goes, hey, if it's really you, tell me to come out and I'll walk to you. Again, what is he thinking? The worst part is that when Jesus says, yes, come to me, he gets out of the boat. That's the crazy part. Like asking Jesus, yes, hey, I want to do something bold is one thing, but to actually follow through in obedient risk, stepping out in courage is a whole different thing. But I want us to not miss something that Peter does. Peter seeks discernment. He didn't just decide, well, it's Jesus, throws himself out of the boat. He chooses discernment, and discernment is a fancy way of saying we want to recognize God's voice above our own voice, above the voice of the people in the world, above the enemy's voice. We want to hear and recognize God's voice and what he wants for me. So he says, hey, I just want to make sure that it is in fact you, because if it's you, I'm coming. You see, there's something about obedient risk that requires discernment, requires a moment to say, hey, God, if this is you, I'm coming. Because so many of us think we're being obedient in our risks, but we're actually being foolish in our own selfish desires. We're listening to our own voice instead of to what God wants. We're choosing our own preferences and hopes over what God is building and growing. And so we have to become people of discernment that listen and recognize God's voice. That means we've got to be in the Word. Why? Because God speaks throughout it. It means we have to sit with him. We have to sit in community and learn what is his voice, what is my voice, what is the world's voice, and begin to hold firm. Let me just tell you, just anecdotally, this next generation has so many voices. The number one gift we can give to the generations behind us is the ability to discern God's voice over anyone else's. Some of you need that for yourself. But the greatest gift we can give them is what Peter has when he says, if it's you, I'm in. So Jesus invites him onto the water, and he steps on the water. This is one of those moments that you're like, I want to live that, right? He gets onto the water, and he focuses on Jesus, and he moves towards Jesus, and there's something powerful and beautiful and wonderful. But what Peter is soon going to learn is that in order for the antidote to distraction, in order for obedient risk to work, it's going to take focus. It's going to take focus. And Peter learns this a little bit the hard way. You see, as he's standing in the water, something happens. It says in verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? You see, it takes focus. And just like it takes focus and intentionality to live out faith, it also takes 1 second of not focus to help us slip. And as we begin to sink, we begin to focus more on the sinking than what God's actually doing right in front of us. But what I want us to understand is, what is he actually distracted by? Did we catch it? He saw the wind. You know what you can't see? Wind. You can feel wind. You can feel the effects of wind. You can see things moving because of the wind, but the wind itself is not something you can see, which means he sees nothing, but he feels the impact of the uncertainty, of the unknown, of things he can't control. How many of us were afraid of nothing, but at the same time, it feels like the effects of the entire world are coming at us, and now we're going, I can't do this, and we lose focus because we see wind, we see nothing. It doesn't even take this crazy moment to get us off track. It's the distraction of what if there is something? What if something could happen? So he takes his eyes off, and in that one moment, he begins to sink. What I love is it's not this instant drop. He begins to sink slowly. But here's where I think Peter actually gets it right. Some of us, especially those of us who have been Christians for a long time, when we begin to sink, there's shame. We don't want anyone to know that we don't have it all together, that we're struggling, that we can't figure out the right answer, that we've taken our focus off of Jesus, that we're no longer living this passionate life that we had when we were young, that something isn't the same, that we've become distracted by the ordinary. We don't want anyone to know, and we're filled with shame because if someone knows, they might be disappointed. We might get our Christian card taken away. I don't know what it is. There's something in us that says this isn't okay. And so what we do is we just continue to sink. But Peter does something different. This is actually, I think, what we can learn from some of the younger generations. Instead of trying to hide it or fix it, he shoots his hand in the air and he says, Lord, save me. That's also obedient risk. He could have fought it. He could have tried to swim back to the boat. He could have tried to fix it all on his own. Instead, he took the obedient risk and he said, Lord, save me, please. And I love this. When we take obedient risks, if it is of God, if we are discerning the voice of God, it will always be met with more Jesus. Immediately, this word is so critical. We see Jesus using it all over, especially in the book of Matthew. Immediately, Jesus reaches down, grabs him by the arm, and pulls him back up. Immediately, Jesus shows up. Some of us think that as we begin to sink, we just keep sinking because nobody wants me. I'm a mess. I'm broken. I've made too many mistakes. I've gotten too distracted. My life looks too good. And if anyone finds out what's actually going on, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. And we begin to sink, and we think if we ask Jesus for help, he's going to be like, clean it up. You made the mess, you clean it. But that's us. That's not Jesus. Jesus immediately reaches down, pulls him back up, and puts him on the water, and he eventually gets him into the boat. It takes focus. When we lose focus, it takes focus to bring it back. It is a consistent life. Our life is not going to be easy. We will lose focus. Everyone will lose the ability to concentrate on what God is doing. We're going to have moments where we fall short, moments where we disobey, moments where we lose sight of what God is doing, and we are going to have seasons where we sink. The question is, do you have enough obedient risk to reach up and say, Lord, save me? Because the antidote to distraction, to fear, is obedient risk, is more Jesus. And he's going to show up. And honestly, probably show off a little bit. The question, though, is, are you still in the boat? Are you still sitting in the boat? Right? In this moment, Jesus brings Peter over. And so we read this last little bit in here. It says, in verse 32, and when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Some of us have been in the boat. And I want to make something very clear. The boat's not actually bad. Some people, I think God puts in the boat because they need a season of rest and respite. You've been going really hard for a long time. You've been walking on water. You've been living an incredibly faithful life. Or things have been really difficult. And he's like, come sit, and watch what I'm doing all around you. But if you caught it, the people that are sitting in the